Ah, June hath arrived, and at last our fandom shall eat like kings. We're still having fun with the new chapters, right? Catching the latest batch of Earthbound references, trailblazing a whole new era of night theory discourse, reckoning with the fact that, in our fandom's decade-long portfolio of alternate universe sexy man Sans fanfictions, none of it could have prepared us for the one Toby Fox wrote, where Sans courts your mother. We're all done getting hubristic about our chances of ever actually beating the Roaring Knight? Yeah, we are? Alright then, back to business as usual. What the ever-loving hell is still going on with Ralsei? I don't think anyone was expecting the sheer amount of Ralsei content we were fed these past two chapters. Don't know about you guys, but I am just vexed. Fox and the crew have done wonders for his characterization on top of his existing allure, and really warmed up some formerly lukewarm people to our favorite little— wait, what does that say? And this left many confident theories shattered in its wake. At this point, I can only really say what I don't believe is the deal with Ralsei, but what kind of Deltarune fan would I be if I only talked about story elements I quote understand? In this video essay, I'm not only going to go over some of the new information we learned about Ralsei, and what we may be able to parse about his trajectory going forward. I'm going to use these new GOAT updates as a jumping off point to talk about Ralsei's developing role in Deltarune's meta-narrative, and the thematic framework that lays for what I believe will be the game's eventual thesis. I'm going to start with the question of what is Ralsei, give up on answering it, and then move on to how is Ralsei, and the answer will not surprise you. Note for courtesy, though some summarizing will be done here, this video does assume a Deltarune level of at least the "we'll never look at Woody Toy Story the same again" range, so be forewarned of both spoilers and some pretty grievous theorist citation chains. Since Chapter 2 I have wanted so badly to believe the theory that Ralsei is Chris's horned headband, or that he's Chris's drawing, or any variant of Baby's first persona, that he's a personification of an ideal, goatified self of Baby Chris's that they created out of their desire to fit in with the Dreamers. For a while, it was the most plausible and, maybe more importantly, thematically cohesive theory for Ralsei's object base that we had. But after these new chapters, I think we're gonna have to call this one officially disproven. Because as much as we've tried to pin down the exact, I guess, rules surrounding how Darkners relate to the objects they personify pre-Chapter 3, we now have not only one of the most comprehensive Dark World wiki entries we'll ever get in the form of Ralsei's Chapter 3 monologue, which gives us some juicy new insights that we'll need to take into account when theorizing about Darkners going forward. We've also got one thing I believe this theory can't hold up against: a concrete example of what a Darkner based on a formerly sentimental object of Chris's would look like. He's right here, and he's yoinked Spamton's leitmotif, or maybe it was vice versa, and he's breaking it down sensitive style. I believe Tenna specifically demonstrates a lot of what separates Ralsei from the other Darkners that leads me to believe that whatever is going on with him is way more than the average Dark World deal. All that to say, I do not think that he has a specific object that he's based on. First, let's get into the weeds about Dark World rules. It's helpful that Ralsei uses the beginning of this chapter to demonstrate the thematic take on some of these ideas we always expected the game would use. Dark worlds are, according to him, essentially fiction, and the Darkners are less of physical objects come to life and more personifications of said objects' usage. They're a result of what one's mind creates out of the items it's surrounded with in the absence of clarity. They are fiction in the sense that they embody the fiction Lightners have created around a particular thing, and therefore Darkner characters in general conceptualize themselves in a similar way to how their object's users conceptualize that thing. Their behavior towards Lightners is shaped by the niche that that object fills in that person's life. For example, Queen wants to create endless dark fountains. She's voyeuristic and takes nothing seriously. She aims to distract Noelle and the others with things that are pointless. This is because she is the internet, which distracts people with entertaining shinies and treats everything as entertainment. Spamton ruthlessly pursues bargaining with Chris, and implied in the Spamton sweepstakes Noelle, because he is a spam email, and spam emails try to lure you in with stuff you want. And most obviously, Tenna wants Chris's friends and family together, happy and entertained by his shenanigans, because that's how he, as a TV, is treated by the family, as a symbol of togetherness when things are going well, and used as distraction when things are not. One of the most notable quotes on the subject of Darkner niche comes from Ram mid-Chapter 3, and you're gonna have to excuse my reading this out loud. I am not going to even attempt the proper accent. He says to Chris upon visiting his shop, quote, "It's me, Ram. You and your brother took me here from the library. How are they all? Queen still bossy, Swatch still got a mohawk, and that salesman. Seems like just yesterday you and that girl had everyone here lined up. Queen on her side, Tenna in back. Heh. Only kids like you two would take a laptop home just to play make-believe." End quote. So this is Chris, and presumably Noelle, given we're talking about a girl in Chris's past, and every other mention of non-dreamers in this dark world refers to holidays. They checked out the laptop that is Queen and the power strip that is Ram from the library, they presumably took home the toys from the abandoned classroom too, and played make-believe with them in the Dreamer House living room. This we can conclude from Tenna being, quote, in back. The kids were playing in front of where the TV was sitting. The small confirmation here is that Darkners from different dark worlds usually have relationships with each other if the objects have been in the same vicinity, regardless of what dark fountains were open at what time. Like, Chris's stolen power strip has a pre-existing relationship with the emails in their spam folder. It makes it all the more odd that none of them recognize Ralsei, none have a pre-existing relationship with him, and they all still pretty much treat his presence as a given and have the marketable plushies of his face commissioned, etc., despite him being an outsider. The bigger can of worms is the fact that a good majority of Darkners we've seen, even the quote abandoned ones, are those which have been personified in narratives by Lightners before, and this is a big one, they recognize those personifications as themselves. When Noelle plays pretend that the laptop is a person, Ram treats that event as Noelle having Queen, quote, on her side. Noelle isn't playing pretend with the laptop that is Queen, the make-believe version that she created is Queen. This is so relevant because it kind of fastens up a little fridge horror of the previous two chapters. The fact that the Dark Worlds are ultimately very temporary, and the character's explicit goal is to close them. Do the Darkners who aren't recruited to Castletown just die? And even creepier, are their complex, detailed inner lives that have existed before the openings of the fountains complete hallucinations? Does every resident of Cyberworld have a collective lifespan of 6 hours? But here we're given Tenna. He's a Darkner character whose happy ending can only be achieved outside of the context of the Dark Worlds. He wants nothing more than to be watched and appreciated like a normal television by a Lightner. If you give him to pre-transition Metaton, his Dark World form is presumably kind of evaporated, but he is still, in his mind, there, because his gorgeous 3D animated royalty-free dancing form is not him. He is not first and foremost a Darkner. He is the television, and that television being used, being part of a person's narrative, is his real life. Wow, I spent so long talking about other characters in my Ralsei video that it practically qualifies as performance art, but I promise this is relevant to him, because, well, normal Darkners are established to have lives outside of the kids' adventures. They have relationships, societies, and even goals unrelated to the happenings of the Dark Realm, so it has to be intentional that Ralsei doesn't, right? Like, this through line is too clear to be a simple world-building inconsistency. His neuroses would make the most sense if he has no real-world associated object, no, quote, real life to get back to after the fountains close. You could argue his mindset fits in perfectly fine with characters like Ram or Sham, whose objects have been abandoned, but their descents into nihilism are still firmly rooted in the status of their Lightworld base. Ralsei just doesn't seem to have anything for him outside of the prophecy. It's his entire existence. That's interesting about him. I feel like the game's gonna lean all in on this. If Ralsei really was the horned headband or something similar that would make him Chris's Sona, by all standards established, Chris Dreamer in Chapter 1 would enter the Dark World and be greeted not with a personification of their headband or drawing or crayon. They would be face to face with a personification of the self they wished they were when they were a kid. If this was Fox & Co.'s intention, they would have insane priorities if they decided to make this the one Darkner character that doesn't play in any part into what they're imagined to be. I just don't think Deltarune would strike the thematic fucking gold that is your better self who fits in with your family more than you come to life, and not utilize that to its fullest extent. Ralsei obviously doesn't think of himself as a better Chris. I have trouble believing he'd even consider that. He doesn't even seem to know them significantly better than, like, Tenna. And their unfamiliarity is an aspect of the two's dynamic that theorists should take into account. Ralsei being somehow born of Chris's imagination would tamper with the very interesting fact that these two characters kind of take a bit to really get each other's whole deal. Like, even though Ralsei has always known about the soul and the difference between the soul and Chris, it seems like in the early chapters he kinda has trouble remembering this. He's got the tendency to treat the actions he knows are the soul and that he knows are Chris like they're from the same person. And it's nice to see him develop out of that. Like that line in Chapter 4 where he shouts out Chris's piano skills as they walk away. That's really sweet under the interpretation that after the player and Ralsei have an emotional moment, he's got to turn around and let Chris know that he likes them by themselves too. It's a neat dynamic to see Ralsei try to figure out Chris's ins and outs in real time. I think the poor guy has enough already going on to speculate on the origins of without coming up with a full other story to expect the game to pile on. Like, I haven't even gotten into all of the knowledge he's cursed with. Like, let's work on unpacking that whole I don't deserve anything because I exist to serve you two part before we give him, like, his third martyrdom complex. And speaking of that, Jesus, tap dancing Christ. This whole time this poor guy's been coming home from his adventures to curl up on the goddamn floor. We, as a fandom, have already established that he does not see himself as a person, that he feels guilty for having his own wants, that he sees himself as much as an NPC as the audience may. This canonical side character thing has that famous Deltarune meta flavoring, and is, to you, the probably very sad and very gay player, relatable. But purely in-universe, Ralsei's complex is weird. Weird in the way where I don't think he's told us everything about what's caused him to think of himself like this. It's weird that he has so much internal strife over specifically the fact that he is a Darkner that none of the other Darkners seem to share with him, and that he doesn't extrapolate this mindset to any other Darkner except himself. Angst over not being real isn't new in this world, but Ram and Sham and arguably Spamton, their crushing dread starts and ends with nihilism, what if we don't matter, what if we're not real? The idea that Ralsei does not deserve an internal life, that his existence should be limited to the serving of Lightner, seems to be a completely Ralsei exclusive concept. He, quote, doesn't need a room because his purpose is to make Chris and Susie happy, so there's no reason for him to have anything, yet technically speaking, so is basically everyone in Castletown, and Queen has a whole suite with a personal traffic jam. And it's notable the way everyone talks to Ralsei when he brings up his purpose complex. The game buries the lead a little here by having him talk very authoritatively about a Darkner's purpose to several more vulnerable characters who are the kind of people who are just gonna take his word for it. But it still shows that other Darkners aren't really used to this kind of thinking. Like, he's extremely respectful of Tenna for all of Chapter 3, suggesting himself that the group humor him on multiple occasions. He clearly doesn't see Tenna's existence as to serve by default, yet when it's time to comfort him, to empathize, he starts talking, we only matter to make Lightners happy, and Tenna shrinks when he hears this. It's treated as purely Ralsei projecting, not a philosophy that the average Dark World resident would be familiar with. It's not even one Ralsei automatically assumes everyone else also thinks, it's just a him thing. This could point to a lot of things, to a Ralsei that's some construction of pure darkness, a Darkner uniquely suited for only the prophecy, to maybe a completely artificial Ralsei created by Gaster for the purpose of the prophecy. PachiiMochii's video on the topic still rings surprisingly true, despite being made pre-Chapter 3. I've been kind of hinting at this or a similar conclusion the entire time, but that's the kind of theory that has a tendency to get so vague you can't go anywhere with it. Gaster did it is a theory meme for a reason. It could point to circumstances unrelated to his origins. Some have theorized that he's prophesied to be sacrificed or even killed by another character. Seems a little extreme, but I have to admit it checks out emotionally, that Ralsei would try to hollow himself out inside because he believes his existence is temporary, that he simply isn't meant to exist for all that long. And now that we've established the number one most contentious question about the origins of our conspicuously goat-shaped pacifist who's biblical level doomed and name is an anagram of oh god, oh no. It just keeps going, guys. He just gets more confusing. I don't know what to make of the fact that despite him clearly invoking Asriel, he's just straight up nothing like Asriel. Not like Flowey or Hyperdeath or Dead Baby Asriel or Deltarune's Dragonfucker college kid, and he's not unlike him in a way where he's their opposite, or where he could serve as a foil or inversion, or be the development of an existing personality given different circumstances, or vice versa. He's just, from what we've seen now, an unrelated character. People have tried to find similarities. For example, both Ralsei and Flowey are tutorial characters that give you unreliable information, that try to appear cute and harmless despite something more sinister lying below. But thematically, this parallel doesn't dish out, because Flowey greets you to deliver the counter-argument to the main theme of the entire game, because he is the main antagonist. Him starting off with kill or be killed serves the purpose of challenging you to prove him right or prove him wrong. Now, Deltarune isn't done yet. We can't make conclusive decisions about the entire game's arguments or counter ones, but Chapter 1 definitely had a main counter message condensed into a simple phrase like UT did. Your choices don't matter. This is delivered by Susie when she threatens Chris right before entering the Dark World as she tries to torment them for no reason. She's not portrayed as being very correct here. She even has one of King's lines, too. Susie is the one who delivers the philosophy the chapter sets out to disprove by intimidating the main character in the inciting incident. Susie is Chapter 1's Flowey is what I mean to say. You can clip that one out of context context and make fun of me for that sentence if you so desire. Ralsei does deliver some arguments that the game is still so-so on. He assures the currently very possessed Chris that their choices do matter, and encourages them to solve problems peacefully. He doesn't directly argue for unconditional pacifism, though. If you look through his tutorial fight dialogue, his stance on violence is pretty wishy-washy and just kind of bends to Chris's actions. If you're too violent to the dummy, he even offers to let you hit him to get your violence out. Jesus, tap dancing, Christ, what is wrong with this guy? So he isn't consistent enough on this front to call his tutorial fight an argument in any direction. And this specification isn't just me getting deep into the weeds or not taking it literally enough. Frisk's, or the player's first fight against Flowey, doesn't teach them jack shit, besides I guess what bullets are. It's not really a tutorial is what I mean to say. It mostly exists to introduce the game's themes. Ralsei's fight is an actual tutorial fight, and it doesn't deliver an argument consistent enough to say that this is the same kind of moment as Flowey's is. So this is what I mean, that's what's so insane about this character. He has this moment that's superficially similar to another Asriel's moment, but you can't follow that parallel down too far because the similarities just don't lead to anything you can do with. We can compare the Asriel's personalities, I suppose. The Deltarune wiki very proudly asserts in the trivia section that his, quote, pacifist personality is similar to the pacifist prince of Undertale, which, again, I guess they're both pacifists if we're putting away everything Flowey has ever done, and also the fact that Ralsei is actually just fine with fighting when Chris does it. But I mean, Asriel had one specific moment where he refused to use his immense power to fight back against humans who were killing him, and Ralsei just encourages kindness as a default ideology and is fine with beating things up when the situation gets dire. That's two completely different contexts. Asriel's, I guess, a bit of a pushover like Ralsei, but for Azzy this is in the form of him allowing himself to be pressured by his best friend into a plan he genuinely believed would save his people, yet would cause collateral damage. For Ralsei, this is in his drive to serve and belief that he, quote, exists to help a group of people he doesn't even know and don't particularly pressure him to do anything. This is a trait they only have in common on paper. Dr. Asriel is a huge nerd who likes to cause mischief with Chris. Ralsei has no hobbies or interests unless prompted, and doesn't understand Chris's antics. He certainly doesn't seem to have any of the traits Chris seems to like or miss about their brother. In Chapter 3 we hear about the two pretending to be chefs messing up ingredients on a cooking show, playing games and watching cartoons together, just generally making mischief and enjoying being kids. All of these are things it's never even occurred to Ralsei that he may like. And comparing any element of UT's Flowsriel to Ralsei feels arbitrary already, because Asriel, Flowey the Flowey Dreamer of the hit indie video game Undertale, has an arc entirely centered around grief, and how his past has shaped his actions and turned him into the kind of person he is at the end of the game. His thing is that he can't move on, and it could not be clearer that Ralsei's first significant life experience is the plot. I'm pretty sure this guy was just born. My previous Ralsei total crack theory, my shot in the dark just to say I'd called it if something similar panned out, was that Ralsei was Gaster's or the Prophecy's attempt to recreate Undertale Asriel in an appeal to the player, even if completely superficial. Like a, I have heard of your lingering fondness for fluffy goat children. I have one that will hopefully be to your satisfaction. I consider this theory officially dead, not only because we can tell from the Place Where It Rained titles that any connection between the two universes will probably place the timeline of Deltarune before Undertale and not after, and even though we know Gaster and his posse exist apart from this chronology, I'm no longer too attached to any theories that explain major, non-directly Gaster-related plot threads with UT placed initially, and just because, as laid out, he has a very clear un-Asriel-related arc and build up to some kind of conclusion about his origins that just isn't looking very Asriel, unless we define Asriel like as subject to a horrible fate, I guess. But there is something. Before I started writing this essay, as I scrubbed through some Chapter 3 footage to consolidate my thoughts into some sensible and concise Tumblr posts, I did another scan through Ralsei's opening scene, where he explains to Susie that he's not real, and something occurred to me. There is, in my opinion, one major point of comparison between the two goats, one that I think would be a genuinely significant parallel, an element that, if explored, would affect Ralsei's ultimate trajectory and fate, that would tie together the game's well-established themes of our interaction with fiction. Ralsei and Asriel are the two characters that hearken the player's eventual departure from the game. They are the characters whose psyche revolves around the fact that you will eventually stop playing. I'll explain. We've established dark worlds equal fiction, right? Ralsei knows he exists only as a personification of an imagined narrative, even though he literally does not know he is a video game NPC, he is, in-universe, a fictional character. Look, here's how he talks about this. This world is not real. The places you go, the people you meet, none of them are. That's why I don't want you and Chris to worry too much about us, okay? It's funny, I was overjoyed to make friends, and selfishly, I started feeling sad too. Sad I couldn't be your friend in real life, Susie. That's why if you know me, Lancer, we can't do it all. So if you ever feel like we're not enough, just forget about us and make some real friends, okay? So, Frisk, it's best if you forget about me, okay? Just go be with the people who love you. Oh, he just gave us the old don't you have anything better to do, didn't he? That's almost the same wording telling the player character to just forget about their adventure and move on to the quote real world. And it's weird this time. Because in the context of Undertale, this has to do with grief, you could say. Much ink has been spilled over the idea that UT's Asriel, in his endless attempts to reset the timeline and find a way to recapture emotions he can no longer feel, is meant to be a parallel to a player endlessly replaying a video game they loved as a kid, squeezing all emotional investment out of it yet refusing to stop playing, because maybe this will be the run that will make them feel like a child experiencing the game for the very first time again. The game assumes that because the true pacifist route is kind of unintuitive, it won't be your first play of the game. Therefore, if it's not your first play, you're probably replaying it because you don't want to leave the characters behind. And then it puts you up against a final boss that's whole motivation is to keep you playing forever so you never leave him behind, and forces you to tell him that it's okay that you can't be around in this world forever. Do you know why I'm doing this? Why I keep fighting to keep you around? Because you're special, Kara. You're the only one who understands me. You're the only one who's any fun to play with anymore. I'm not ready for this to end. I'm not ready for you to leave. I'm not ready to say goodbye to someone like you again. So please, stop doing this and just let me win. Undertale is a game that aims to reach the truest closure for the player it possibly can. To tell you that it's okay to move on from this world. That the characters you love so much are happy and safe, even when you aren't looking. That they want you to bring this sense of fulfillment out beyond the game. That's why it spends the last 10 minutes with every single character telling you that you're the coolest, most specialist guy in the world as they usher you out of the underground. It's to make you feel like the same determination that caused you to care so much that you replayed to give everyone the happiest ending you could will carry over into other experiences, that you will feel this way again, so it's okay to let go. This, over the almost 10 years Undertale has been around, always strikes a strange nerve with the people who like the game and, well, aren't experiencing maladaptive obsession over it, because now they're playing a game primarily thematically concerned with telling you when to stop, which is just fine on the game's end. I mean, stories don't have to cover every single iota of the human experience. Undertale set out to tell a very specific story about a couple of very specific people, and did that effectively. But when it's time to write another one, it leaves a certain chunk of meta-exploration of one's experience of fiction untapped. The game hasn't told you yet when it's good to be that invested. And then we have Ralsei. He treats his own world in the same way his counterpart does, like it's just a story that exists to make you feel good about yourself and fill you with the determination needed to go pursue your real life. He's the one encouraging Chris and applauding them for every little thing they do. He just wants to be a happy little experience that gives the Lightners the hope they need to go have some real ones without him. But he's wrong when he does this, according to the text. When Asriel uses this, it humanizes himself, tells the player he understands he's only a temporary, fleeting presence in their life, but he cares about you anyway. Ralsei uses it to dehumanize himself, because, well, unlike Asriel, Ralsei is very much not a long-gone fleeting presence. He's right here, and he has friends. The mention of this meta-element, that this is fiction that you're one day going to have to put away, jerks us out of the story, not pulls us in. The meta-undercurrent of Chris and Susie spending the game assuring him that he does have a real existence, that he should be invested in his own life, showing him that they care about him, doubles to show the audience that they are right to be invested in things that happen in fiction, even if it isn't, quote, real, that they're right to take the game seriously, to have real fond memories playing it. And I think this fits in with the overall way Ralsei is treated by the narrative. Like, he was the first character to get merch made out of him, and the merch is now canon. In-universe, you can buy a Ralsei plush for $32 MRSP, whatever that means. The game is taking every single opportunity to make Ralsei an in-universe fictional character, to remind us that by the standards of this world he's not real, and then turn that around and tell you that you're still right to care about him. This is perfectly cohesive with the game's overall escapism theme it has going on. Ralsei and his team are, under this and similar interpretations, representing different kinds of being invested in fiction. Susie is the person who, while initially hesitant in investing herself in a narrative, eventually goes all in on it as a way to grow as a person, to build relationships, to carry herself into a better place in life overall. To Susie, the Dark Worlds are an experience of fiction that is so blindingly real to her, that is instrumental in the broader picture of her life. Quote Susie, "But Ralsei, how could you say you're not real? I can see you, I can feel you, I can hear you. You think I could just forget you? Forget Lancer? Forget everyone? I don't care what you say you are, you're real to me, okay?" Chris, however, man, I love that little can of worms. They occupy a strange place as our protagonist, and also the one who isn't invested like the others, who's clearly using the soul and the Dark Worlds for some kind of ulterior motive, who's actively trying to cause, for some reason, the end of the world their entire adventure exists to stop, who is the one who reminds us of our own lack of immersion by ripping out our control. Chris isn't buying the fiction. It seems like they haven't been feeling the fiction in general. We know this because they seem to have lost all of their hobbies and interests in the stress of their current predicament, with an empty room, and according to Tenna, they've ceased all their former escapist hobbies of television and gaming. We know this because they hesitate to create art by playing the piano until Susie encourages them. For Chris, the Dark Worlds are something they are trying very hard to distance themselves from emotionally. They're using the Dark World happenings for a, quote, real purpose. This element of Chris isn't buying it is encapsulated in the final Chapter 3 secret console sequence. Chris plays a game inside a game, experiences fiction inside fiction, gets layers deeper into the illusion, darker than dark. How does it feel to be right about everything, Molly Stars? Susie and Ralsei have a fine time getting their gaster on. They, in fiction, react to the even fiction or fiction in the same way their real selves react to the first layer of fiction that is the Dark World. They use it to express themselves in ways they never could before. Ralsei gets to enjoy Chris's role as the leader in a low-stakes, safe environment that encourages him to try new things, and Susie just plays around as Ralsei. But Chris alone, they play the mantle game and essentially reenact Snowgrave, with fictional Chris killing everyone and everything they encounter before getting used up and taunted by Eram. As they get deeper and deeper into fiction, they get so deep that it circles back around and reality seeps in. When they buy into the illusion, they can only see the parts of themselves they want to keep buried. Earlier, going deeper and deeper into the Dark Worlds to fight the secret bosses just reminded Chris that they too are not free, which they weren't a fan of. And when we go a layer deeper than that and play the mantle game, it brings up their potential for an entire violent timeline that you don't have to have played to get this scene. And not to mention, going deeper than that gives you the egg rooms that show trauma they're clearly repressing. The thing that Chris is faced with that scares them in the mantle game isn't exactly their sins. Again, this is not a Snowgrave route scene, but it is clearly supposed to resemble Snowgrave. Getting too deep into fiction for Chris reveals to them their own capacity for harm. To them, this is what happens when they go too far into the unreal. Susie and Ralsei go deep into unreality to find what will make them better, and Chris resists, and when they do, they only find the parts they believe will make them worse. They could collapse without their strings. They could kill everyone. In a wiki-level world-building sense, it does not matter if Chris is Frisk or Kara. They are their own character, let's not reduce them to a copy, etc. However, thematically, Chris is absolutely Frisk plus Kara, in the sense that those two characters are honestly more concepts than characters in the OG game, and they are the concepts that seem to haunt Chris's nightmares. Like, we know what Kara became post-death. They became the concept of losing all investment and attachment in a world, to the point of treating it as one big challenge destroy just for the sake of watching a number go up and then throw away. Kara is a player, reacting to a real world they've grown to hate by throwing themselves into the nearest fictional world and using it as a tool to gain the kind of power that they never could in real life. When Chris lets themselves get too deep into the fiction of the Dark Worlds, they're seeing Kara in that sense. They're seeing what they know they have the capacity to become, and it makes them less willing to buy into the Dark Worlds, more wanting to disconnect themselves, and therefore more Kara-like. For Chris, escapism doesn't work. Okay, so this Ralsei video has now officially gone on at least 2 non-Ralsei related tangents. God, I'm so lucky I can turn this into a meta joke. Sorry, dude. Now that we have our bearings on what Ralsei will most likely represent and why he'll represent this, we can start cracking open what the hell is actually going on with this guy. As I've mentioned, this is an analysis. I don't really have any new theories. At the end of the day, I think it's too early to sand over some of the thematic and emotional weird spots in Ralsei's arc. There's a lot we don't know about this guy, but I think we have enough soft feelsy content to point us definitively on some of the hard facts. Whatever Ralsei's whole deal is in terms of object base and Asriel status, I hope the idea of him being an in-universe NPC is explored, and I hope that us encouraging him to be his own person doubles as a kind of validation of the fantasy we play into when launching the program. I don't know how the game would do that per se, but I think this thematic background wouldn't hurt to keep in mind. Thank you guys for watching me slowly lose my marbles. I have plenty more ideas for video essays about both Undertale and Deltarune, so if you would like to subscribe, you might see some more of them.